Artos. How can I obtain an ideal physical body? If I can't say it, you'll die. Zuo Chi said, I only understand a little bit. Keep heading north towards the endless permafrost called Frederick. Perhaps you will get a decent physical body there. Ash. Zuo Chi, what exactly do I need to do to bring Frederick together? Zuo Chi, is this. I just have a slight understanding. You can find a man who knows everything as a blood alliance. Fuego. Isolde, my beloved, how should I meet you again? Zuo Chi, I understand a little bit. It wasn't until one day, when Zuo Chi stood at the top of the Rune continent, shoulder to shoulder with true gods such as Bard and Aurelian Thor, that people realized that what Zuo Chi had said was a little more understood beginner, proficient, and ultimate. And only after reaching perfection can one have a slight understanding. Keywords of the novel. Rune land. I really have a slight understanding of everything. No pop-ups, Rune land. I really have a slight understanding of everything. Download the complete text. Rune land. I really have a slight understanding of everything. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Travel. Dark American Crisis. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Travel. Dark American Crisis. I'm Zuo Chi. I just crossed over and was about to die. The land of runes, to the east of the continent of Shrima. In the endless desert, fierce winds swept through the yellow sand, and a sandstorm that devoured people quickly took shape. But in the next second, a blood-red sword aura pierced through the sky, completely dispelling the soon-to-be-formed sandstorm. A tall figure holding a ferocious giant sword and with blood-colored wings on its back rushed out of the sandstorm, charging towards the sand bandit community ahead like a tiger entering a flock of sheep. Under the sword of this figure, whether it is the sand bandit holding a sharp blade or the multifold giant beast several meters high, they are all as fragile as paper. In the past, these sand bandits marched in groups, relying on the ancient artifacts in the hands of their leaders to dominate the Shurima desert. Countless refugees and caravans died in their hands, and they also became a terrifying force in the Shurima desert. But now, facing the demon in front of them with bloodshot eyes, they seem to have no other choice but to pull their necks and wait for slaughter. After all, even their leader holding an ancient artifact was cut in half by the demon's sword. If it were just a massacre, perhaps they wouldn't have been so scared that they didn't even have the courage to escape. But they watched helplessly as the demon, after chopping their companions into pieces, integrated those fragments of corpses into their own body. Under the repair of their companions' severed limbs and arms, the shattered body of the demon was rapidly approaching perfection. The impact of this scene on them has almost reached an unparalleled level. And just as this massacre continued, behind a sand dune not far from here the sound of dense yellow sand friction suddenly sounded. Immediately after, the yellow sand next to the sand dunes began to be overturned. Bang! A man with a bare upper body suddenly sat up from the yellow sand, and on the way, he also threw a desert rock lizard above, which was sunbathing, several tens of meters away. Puke cough. Struggling to spit out the sand from his mouth, Zuo Chi looked around him with a bewildered expression. Where is this? It was hit by a truck directly from the capital into the Sahara. Standing up from the sand pile, Zuo Chi felt his head a bit confused. But soon, Zuo Chi looked towards his left front. There, the piercing cries kept ringing, accompanied by the sound of swords cutting through flesh and bones. Zuo Chi quickly lowered his body and moved closer to the edge of the sand dune, wanting to see what was happening there. Just as he saw what was happening ahead, his eyes widened wide in an instant, with a look of dreaming in his eyes. Artos. As a loyal fan of League of Legends, how could Zuo Chi not recognize the figure in front of him, wielding a giant sword, with wings on his back, and standing nearly 3 meters tall, as the dark sword demon Artos in the world of League of Legends in his past life. Seeing this scene, Zuo Chi felt an unreal feeling all over him. At the same time, he also realized another point. If Artos ahead is real, does that mean that his current position is not even Sahara? But it's Shurima. After all, it seems that only the continent of Shurima has such boundless and vast deserts in the entire Rune land. Have you traveled through it? Zuo Chi finally realized his environment and couldn't help but feel a little fortunate that he didn't really die. But soon, it seemed that something had come to mind, and the expression on Zuo Chi's face completely froze. Based on what I see now, combined with my previous understanding of Artos. If Zuo Chi guessed correctly, Artos at this time should have suffered physical damage and is collecting limbs to repair his own body. In that case, if these sand bandits have enough flesh for Artos to use, he may leave directly afterwards. But if the physical bodies of these sand bandits are not enough to completely repair Artos' body, does that mean he needs to find another physical body to make up for it? So, this human who suddenly appeared near Artos. Zuo Chi's hands were quickly groping around him, trying to find something that could help him get through the current crisis. But with only a pair of tattered animal leather shorts all over his body, he couldn't pull out anything from anywhere. Where are the golden fingers? This time traveling, naked wearing. After touching his entire body repeatedly but to no avail, Zuo Chi had no choice but to lift his head again and look ahead. Anyway, we still need to first see how the front line is killing. Zuo Chi now only wants to say, "Kill them, but you can't kill me anymore." However, just as Zuo Chi slowly lifted his head and looked ahead, a cold sweat slowly trickled down his forehead. Because at this moment, he cast his gaze forward and met a pair of blood-red eyes. At this moment, a thought slowly rose from Zuo Chi's heart. I'm Zuo Chi, I just crossed over and was about to die. At the moment when this thought arose, Zuo Chi also saw that Artos in front of him suddenly stepped on his feet and rose straight into the sky. His blood-colored wings spread out and charged straight towards him. Zuo Chi quickly turned around, he wanted to run. But how can a mortal body escape from the hands of a demigod? Boom! Just as Zuo Chi stepped forward, a fierce roar sounded in front of him. A pitch-black figure enveloped the majestic momentum and descended from the sky, smashing a large pit in front of Left Pond. At the same time, the rapid airflow also made the surrounding yellow sand scratch Left Pond's cheek like a knife. Ants, die. In the next moment, the blood-red giant sword slashed through the sand curtain and struck towards the top of the left pool. Faced with Artos' attack, Zuo Chi had almost no remaining resistance. He could only watch helplessly as Artos' giant sword drew closer and closer to his head. Just as the giant sword was less than half a meter away from Zuo Chi's head, Zuo Chi's roar finally sounded. Artos. I can give you a powerful physical body. Buzz. Just as Zuo Chi's words fell, Artos' giant sword suddenly stopped. Zuo Chi could even smell the nauseating bloody smell on the giant sword. Ants, what are you talking about? Behind the giant sword, a hoarse voice rang out, and at the same time, the sword was retracted. At this moment, Zuo Chi finally stood face to face with Artos up close. However, just as Zuo Chi looked at Artos, or rather, when Artos' question came, Zuo Chi's eyebrows suddenly raised. Because just in front of his line of sight, a row of light blue fonts slowly emerged. Host can choose to help Artos fulfill his dream. After the conditions are met, the host can choose one of Artos' many abilities and characteristics. Left pool. End of this chapter. I have some understanding of chapter 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I have some understanding of chapter 2. Ants, repeat what you just said. Just as Zuo Chi was stunned, Artos' hoarse voice full of murderous intent rang out once again. Zuo Chi looked at Artos, specifically at his cracked body. Despite having absorbed the bodies of dozens of sand bandits, Artos still had a very deep crack in his chest at this moment. Zuo Chi even saw that beneath that crack, there was no existence of a heart at all. Subconsciously, Zuo Chi looked at the blood-red giant sword in Artox's hand. At the intersection of the hilt and body of the giant sword, there was a constant sound of a beating heart. According to Zuo Chi's understanding of the dark race, Artox standing in front of him at this time is not the essence of Artox at all. His essence should be the sword in his hand. The physical body standing in front of oneself is only a carrier of Artox's power and spirit. And compared to the physical body of Artox during its heyday, this carrier is incredibly weak. Perhaps this is also the main reason why Artox's strength is not as strong as before. If possible, which dark descendant doesn't want a powerful physical body? After all, the stronger the physical body, the greater the power that the dark race can exert. Artox wandered on the land of runes for so long, yet still did not obtain his ideal physical body. Now that he finally heard Zuo Chi mention this, he naturally didn't want to give up easily. And this is also the reason why Zuo Chi was able to make Artox stop his giant sword. Zuo Chi said in a deep voice, "I really have some understanding of where to find a physical body. Do you have some understanding?" Just as Zuo Chi's words fell, Artox came to him. His body, which is over 3 meters tall, and his blood-colored eyes are extremely intimidating. "And, it's best for what you say to be true. Otherwise, I will let you experience the most painful torture in this world." Zuo Chi raised his head and looked up at Artox in front of him from bottom to top, feeling a myriad of emotions in his heart. He suddenly said, "Artox, before that, I want to ask, do you have any other wishes besides obtaining a physical body?" Artos narrowed his eyes slightly, and his giant sword slowly lifted, with the tip only a few centimeters away from the nose of Left Pond. "Ant, are you playing with me?" Faced with the threat of a dark descendant, Zuo Chi's expression remained unchanged. Because he knew that at this moment, he had no other choice but to remain calm. Panic will not allow him to survive under Artox's hands, it will only make him die faster. All he can do is try his best to complete the prompts on that line and help Artox fulfill his dream. As long as he can help Artos fulfill his dream, he can obtain one from the many powers or characteristics of Artos. At that time, he will no longer be a powerless mortal. Zuo Chi spread out his hand and said, "It's just talk. What if it happens?" Zuo Chi's performance surprised Artox very much. He is now a dark descendant, and in the past, he was a soaring deity. No matter when or where he faced him, he had never encountered a calm mortal like Zuo Chi. Artos did not believe that Zuo Chi could escape from his hands. So, Artos said in an indifferent voice, "My wish is to let the world embrace and annihilate it." Left pool. This wish may not be very easy to fulfill. With a helpless expression on his face, he looked at Artox and said, "Artox, do you have a slightly simpler wish? What if I can really help you?" "A simpler one." Artos turned his head and looked into the depths of the desert west of Shurima. Subsequently, Atticus said calmly, "Kill all the star spirits. Soul escape from this giant sword. Return to the soaring celestial body. The ancient Shurima Empire returns to its prime. Stop, stop, stop. Stop." Zuo Chi stopped at Artox and quickly said, "All right Artox, let's explore how to get you a suitable physical body now." Artox. There's no way, these wishes that Artox mentioned are really a bit difficult. Judging from the fact that Zuo Chi is now wearing only a pair of tattered shorts all over his body, the wishes expressed by Artox are somewhat out of line. Originally, Zuo Chi thought that if Artox had any simpler wish than obtaining a physical body, it would be easier for him to fulfill it. But upon hearing this, it is still more realistic to help him obtain a physical body. Upon hearing Zuo Chi's words, Artox snorted coldly but did not answer. However, his gaze was also very obvious. "You'd better say why, otherwise I'll cut you into 8 pieces." Artox was extremely skeptical about what Zuo Chi had said, saying that he had a slight understanding. "Raise your hand and pull Artox's giant sword aside, while left pool sits cross-legged on the ground. He looked at Artos and said, Artos, what level of physical body do you need to carry your power? Zuo Chi remembers very clearly that the way Artos searched for his physical body was different from all the known Dark Descendants so far. Other Dark Descendants, such as Cain and Virus, are just looking for a suitable host, and after taking them away, they take their flesh for their own use. But Artos is completely different. Artos has never had the idea of searching for a host. His approach is to kill all the bodies he admires, and then use the flesh and blood of these bodies to reassemble a body similar to his original appearance. It can only be said that in terms of searching for physical bodies, Artos's requirements are still very high. Of course, it may also be because Artos's power and pride are much higher than those of other dark races. Based on these, Zuo Chi needs to be more rigorous when helping Artos find his physical body. However, he already had a train of thought in his heart. Artos looked at Zuo Chi, who was sitting cross-legged and indifferent, with a cold gaze as he carried his giant sword behind his back. At the same time, he said, no matter how many mortal bodies there are, they are not enough. Ants, after all, are ants. No matter how many they are useless. Zuo Chi nodded with a smile and said, I naturally know this. So, I won't let you search for a mortal body either. Artos stood in front of Zuo Chi, quietly waiting for him to continue speaking. And Zuo Chi finally spoke out what he was thinking in his heart. Artos, have you been wandering in the Rune land for so long before? Have you ever been to Frederick before? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. 4 Types of Sky-Defying Rewards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. 4 Types of Sky-Defying Rewards. Zuo Chi's words fell, and Artos's eyes also turned towards him. Mortal, have you ever been to the northern permafrost? Frederick is located in the northernmost part of the Rune land and is covered with ice and snow all year round, which is why Artos called it northern frozen soil. Faced with Artos's question, Zuo Chi hardly hesitated and nodded directly. I've been there before. There's no way, it's not possible not to say that. Without saying that, how could Artos believe what he said? However, in his past life, Zuo Chi had played in the region of Frederick, so he should be considered to have been to Frederick. When Artos heard that Zuo Chi had actually been to Frederick, a hint of extremely obvious surprise flashed in his eyes. He couldn't believe it, but this useless mortal in front of him had even been to the frozen soil in the north. And he hasn't died yet. Zuo Chi looked at Artos's appearance and was also somewhat surprised in his heart. According to the understanding of Zuo Chi's past life, Artos had once been to Frederick. And also slaughtered the entire tribe of barbarians along the way. Is it possible that the current timeline has not yet reached that point? Zuo Chi tentatively asked, Artos, haven't you been to Frederick? Artos shook his head. Whether it was in the past or now, neither my compatriots nor I have set foot on the territory of northern permafrost. Zuo Chi's eyes were full of confusion. Why is this? There are many ancient gods in the permafrost of the Arctic. Artos said directly, whether it's for the former Shurima or for me now, conquering that land will come at a very heavy cost. Moreover, Queen Sertaka once said, unless in special circumstances, try not to touch that land. Queen Sertaka. Upon hearing Artos mention this name, Zuo Chi couldn't help but glance at Artos inexplicably. Sertaka, the Empress Dowager of Phasian, was the founding monarch of the ancient Shurima Empire and the first person to ascend Shurima. It seems that there are still memories of being a soaring god in Artos's heart. However, if I can't find a suitable physical body anywhere else in the Rune land, I will also set foot on that land. Artos added. Speaking of which, Zuo Chi knew. If he hadn't appeared, Artos should have gone to Frederick in the near future. But now he has been intercepted by Zuo Chi. Upon hearing Zuo Chi's words, Artos asked again, Mortal, does the physical body you are referring to exist in the permafrost of the far north? Zuo Chi nodded without hesitation. Exactly. Aderx, you may need to step onto Frederick and search for a qualified physical body on your own. Oh. Aderx narrowed his blood-colored eyes and looked at Zuo Chi suspiciously. He had some doubts, whether Zuo Chi was lying to him or not. After all, in order to survive, Zuo Chi is likely to fabricate some non-existent things. Zuo Chi naturally knew the concerns in Aderx's heart, so he knew that he still needed to say some harsh news. Artos, if you want to kill the Twilight Spirit and defeat Pansen, sometimes you have to take necessary measures. And going to Frederick to obtain this body is one of the necessary means. At this point, Zuo Chi didn't continue, just silently looked at Artos. After listening to Zuo Chi's account, Artox's blood-colored eyes flashed with a hint of intense turbulence. Boom! The blood-colored energy instantly erupted, blowing the left pool sitting on the ground out more than 10 meters away. Ants, why do you know these things? Zuo Chi slowly stood up from the yellow sand and shook the sand on his body. He looked at Artos and said, I have heard the story of the great General Artos of the ancient Shurima Ascender from ancient books, so I have some understanding. Artos had a skeptical expression on his face. How could his grudges with Twilight Star Spirit and Pansen be recorded in ancient books? But even so, did Zuo Chi still have some understanding? However, there was a hint of wavering in Aderx's originally skeptical eyes. One reason is that Zuo Chi was able to speak out of thin air about Twilight Star Spirit and Pan Sr. Secondly, he wandered around the Rune land for so long, yet still couldn't find a suitable physical body. Now, he suddenly heard these things from a seemingly talkative mortal. This further shook Aderx's heart, who was already preparing to go to Frederick. The blood-colored eyes solidified on Zuo Chi for a long time, and Zuo Chi also felt a bit suffocated due to the violent power of Aderx. At this moment, the two looked at each other like this, and neither of them spoke. In the desert, it seems that only the howling of the storm remains. After an unknown amount of time, the force pressing on Zuo Chi's body slowly dissipated, and Aderx's giant sword was once again carried by him behind his back. Mortal, if you deceive me, no matter where you escape, I will find you and let you taste all the pain in this world. The voice of Artos, accompanied by the strong wind in the desert, came to the ear of Left Pond. Immediately afterwards, the wings behind Atticus spread as wide as possible, and blood-colored airflow burst out from his body. Under the gaze of Zuo Chi, he waved his wings and rose straight into the sky, quickly disappearing from Zuo Chi's sight. At this point, Zuo Chi finally survived in an almost deadly battle with his 3-inch sharp tongue. At this moment, the familiar blue interface appeared once again in front of Zuo Chi's line of sight. Host successfully helped Aderx fulfill his dream. Dream level. B. Host, please choose one of the following 4 rewards. Seeing these 2 light blue prompt fonts, Zuo Chi couldn't help but get excited. It seems that finding a suitable physical body for Aderx has become a foregone conclusion. Zuo Chi said, after all this hell has started, can we still have no golden fingers? Moreover, this kind of golden finger, which helps others fulfill their dreams and gains the ability or characteristics of the person who fulfills their dreams, also surprised Zuo Chi. Shaking his head and throwing away his chaotic thoughts, Zuo Chi was extremely excited and looked at his reward. In front of him, there are 4 light blue square frames. Within the box, there are 4 types of rewards provided by the system, and Left Pool only needs to choose one from them. Evil Fire Chain. A special chain formed by the condensation of hellfire, which can assist in battles. Partial Ascension Power. The power of Artos before he fell into the Dark Clan, due to insufficient dream fulfillment level, can only be obtained partially. Great Destruction. Squeeze the power of one's own dark lineage, instantly unleashing power several times greater than oneself. When activated, the power rapidly decays, and the duration is related to one's own power. Blood Magic. Not considered a top blood magic, but can still be used to form a physical body. It can also absorb other people's blood and quickly recover from injuries. This looking at the four options in front of him, Zuo Chi was completely stunned. He never expected that the reward given by the system would be so outrageous. Among these four options, if Left Pool remembers correctly, the evil fire chain and the great destruction seem to be the skills of Artos, right? And the power of ascension and blood magic seem to be the characteristics of Artos himself. Undoubtedly, these four types of rewards, no matter which one they are extremely terrifying. And now, Zuo Chi also faces a dilemma of choice. Choose one out of four, which one should you choose? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Power of Ascension. The Land of Void Decay. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. The Power of Ascension. The Land of Void Decay. Looking at the four blue boxes in front of us, the fingers of the left pool slowly lifted and pointed towards the second reward. Just as Zuo Chi's finger touched the reward, the light blue interface in front of him also turned into a light dot and disappeared with the wind. In the next moment, Zuo Chi's body suddenly shook and he looked up at the sky. Boom! Under the gaze of Zuo Chi, a magnificent golden energy descended from the sky and shot straight towards him. This energy is hot and mysterious, and the power it contains seems to be able to melt all things in the world. The golden energy completely submerged the left pool, leaving only the sound of the airflow hitting the yellow sand in the Shurima desert. After an unknown amount of time, the golden beam of light gradually faded away, and Zuo Chi, who was naked on his upper body, slowly walked out of it. At this moment, under the sunlight, there seemed to be a deep starry sky in Zuo Chi's eyes. His robust upper body, with even and perfect muscles, and sharp short hair, is a handsome and extraordinary Eastern face. Opening his arms, Zuo Chi carefully felt the power contained in his body. Is this the ascending power of the Shurima Empire? Zuo Chi can almost be certain that his combat power is almost 100 or even 1,000 times that of the past. Moreover, there has been a tremendous improvement in various aspects of abilities, including perception and endurance. Thousands of years ago, the ancient Shurima Empire, relying solely on a few thousand ascending legions, unified all places except for the newborn land of Ionia and the northern frozen land of Frederick. Each soaring individual possesses the ability to withstand a human army with their own strength. It can be imagined to what extent the power of soaring has been powerful. Now, although Zuo Chi has only gained some of the ascent power of the Artos Ascender, his combat power has still been greatly improved. For these four rewards, Zuo Chi hesitated for a long time. He originally intended to choose the ultimate skill of Artos, which was the Great Destruction. But as he watched the system's introduction to the Great Destruction, he ultimately chose to give up. Great Destruction. Squeeze the power of one's own dark lineage, instantly unleashing power several times greater than oneself. When activated, the power rapidly decays, and the duration is related to one's own power. With the strength of ordinary people before Zuo Chi, it is feared that the Great Destruction could only bring him an instant explosion. After this moment of explosion, I guess I can't even be a man for 3 seconds. As for blood magic, for some reason, as soon as Zuo Chi saw the blood magic, the vampire wearing a red robe came to mind and relied on sucking fresh blood to strengthen himself. Perhaps that is the ultimate appearance of ordinary people mastering blood magic. Zuo Chi doesn't want to become like that person, ghost. So compared to the other 3 rewards, the power of soaring is undoubtedly much more reliable and comprehensive. Now, Zuo Chi is no longer the weak chicken with no binding power. Looking around, Zuo Chi's gaze couldn't help but turn towards the direction where Artos had just been. Over there, a strong smell of blood surged into the sky, and the ground was covered with limbs and broken arms. Ordinary people, faced with this scene, probably vomit out all the food they had eaten in their previous lives. But as Zuo Chi looked over there, a bright light suddenly flashed in his eyes. Stepping on the blood-red sand, Left Pawn's purpose was extremely clear and headed towards a certain place. There, buried in the sand, a section of the blade was exposed to the air, shimmering with cold light under the sunlight. Seemingly guided by the rising power within his body, Zuo Chi could almost see this short sword at a glance. Approaching, Zuo Chi brushed away the yellow sand buried above and held the short, dark golden knife in his hand. Buzz! In an instant, Zuo Chi only felt that the soaring force inside his body seemed to have some connection with this short knife. This is the weapon of the Ascender. Zuo Chi knew in his past life that countless ancient relics were buried in the vast desert of Shiruma, and countless ancient tombs and underground caves were also found. Some of these ancient tombs belonged to the deceased ascending beings, while others belonged to peripheral members of the royal family of the ancient Shirima Empire. But without exception, there will always be countless treasures buried in these ancient tombs. This is also the main reason why, despite the extremely high level of danger in the Shirima desert, there are still misses. Peel 2 coming here to search for treasures. If Zuo Chi guessed correctly, the short sword in his hand should have been obtained by these sand bandits from a certain ancient tomb of a rising person. Fortunately, it is only the weapon of the Ascendant, not the Dark Descendant after the fall. If it were a Dark Descendant, I'm afraid these sand bandits would never have been able to leave that ancient tomb, and there would have been an extra Dark Descendant who emerged from weapons in this world. He tossed the short knife in his hand, and a glimmer of light flashed in Zuo Chi's eyes. At this moment, his combat power was greatly enhanced in a short period of time. Now, what Zuo Chi needs to do is to leave this desolate desert as soon as possible. However, looking at the endless desert around and the sun hanging above my head, I only felt a bewildered expression on my face. Just crossed over, Zuo Chi couldn't distinguish where he was currently in the Shirima Empire. Stepping fiercely on the yellow sand, Left Pawn soared into the sky. Temporarily suspended in the sky with the power of ascent, Left Pawn's gaze cast in every direction around him. In the end, Left Pool came to the conclusion. He is located at the border between the Shirima Empire and the dark purple scorched earth. Not far from his east, it is no longer a desert, but a dark purple land. Zuo Chi almost knows where it is without even thinking about it. Kasha. The former vassal state of the Shirima Empire, due to dissatisfaction with its rule, chose to attract the Void to descend in order to compete with the Ascending Legion. But after the arrival of the Void, countless Void creatures instantly turned this land into a human hell. The ancient Shirima Empire also paid an extremely painful price to suppress the Void of Kasha. Countless ascending beings died in battle, and only a few remaining ascending beings were planted with the seeds of emptiness in their hearts, laying the groundwork for the dark race that will unfold hundreds of years later. Nowadays, even after thousands of years, that land has not yet emerged from the harm of the Void. Looking at the vast scorched earth, Zuo Chi hesitated a bit. Heading north and west, there is an endless and winding desert that stretches for thousands of miles. I don't know when I will be able to leave. Heading south, it is the southernmost part of the continent of Shirima, as well as the southernmost part of the entire Rune land, an endless sea of watchers. At this moment, Zuo Chi seems to have only the option of heading east after all. Although there may be creatures in the void over there, there are still remnants of villages. If humans could be found, the possibility of leaving Shirima would also be much greater. After identifying the target, Zuo Chi did not hesitate anymore and rushed towards it. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Evil Cultists of the Void God Sect. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Evil Cultists of the Void God Sect. With the blessing of the Power of Ascension, the speed of Left Pool is extremely fast. Although it may not yet reach the level of Artos, it is still much higher than the average person. Soon, in front of Zuo Chi's line of sight, there was no longer a sky full of yellow sand and an endless desert. The dark purple earth and the dense purple sky began to appear in his eyes. Walking on the dark purple land of Kasha, Zuo Chi could still vaguely hear the roar of beasts coming from deep underground. Zuo Chi knew that it was probably a void creature lurking underground in Ikasia. Around the left pond, there are charred ruins and broken walls everywhere, and from beginning to end, no animals or plants have been seen in the left pond. Seeing this scene, Zuo Chi couldn't help but doubt whether his choice would be wrong. Is there really human existence in this environment here? The miscellaneous of the Void God Sect, even if I die, I will hold you back. Those beasts who associate with the Void, you all deserve to die. Suddenly, Zuo Chi's ears moved and he quickly turned his head in a certain direction. The sound just now came from that direction. And from this sentence, Zuo Chi can hear that there seems to be a conflict between someone and the Void. Is it a Void creature? After some thought, Zuo Chi quickly swept towards that side. If these hard-earned people were to die at the hands of the Void monster, then Zuo Chi wouldn't know how long it would take to find a living person. Sweeping past the wreckage of the building ahead, the scene also entered the eyes of Zuo Chi. There, a group of people dressed in civilian attire holding weapons were surrounded by several people dressed in dark purple robes. These people dressed in dark purple robes seemed to possess some kind of void magic, imprisoning those civilians to death. Those civilians have always been cursing these people and constantly trying to counterattack with their weapons. But unfortunately, in the eyes of these purple-robed mages, these civilians are still too weak. Everything on this land will return to the Void, and the Void God's Church is invincible. If you trespass into the realm of the Void God Sect without authorization, then become offerings to Lord Marzaha. As the purple-robed mage in the lead spoke, the magical light emanating from his hand became increasingly intense, and the commoners in the middle instantly fell into immense pain. On the other hand, when Zuo Chi saw the scene ahead, he was also slightly stunned. Not a void creature. Instead, it's a group of humans. Not only that, Zuo Chi also keenly noticed what the purple-robed mage was saying. Marzaha, for this cult leader who claims to want the world to embrace the void, Zuo Chi still has some understanding. Thinking of this, everything seems to make sense. These purple-robed mages in front of us should be followers of the Void God Church founded by Marzaha. Looking at the civilians trapped in the center by the group of purple-robed mages ahead, Zuo Chi's eyes narrowed slightly. Just as these civilians were about to be reduced to nothingness by the void magic in the hands of the purple-robed mage, a shirtless figure rushed towards the group of purple-robed mages. Zuo Chi's feet suddenly stepped onto the ground, and he rushed forward like a shell. Noticing the movement here, those purple-robed mages all looked towards them. When they saw Zuo Chi, there was a strong hint of disdain in the eyes of the purple-robed mage. Another offering delivered to your door. The purple-robed mage led by him lifted his hand towards the left pool, and the sparkling purple light wrapped around the left pool. The civilians shouted loudly towards the left pool, "Get out of here. Don't worry about us." The long-standing atrocities of the Void God Church have instilled a deep-seated fear in these civilians. These people also do not believe that Zuo Chi, alone, can compete with these mages who possess void magic. Moreover, at this moment, Zuo Chi was wearing tattered animal leather shorts all over his body, and he didn't seem like a strong enough person to defeat the void mage. However, Zuo Chi seemed to have not heard their words and rushed straight towards this side. The void magic wielded by the purple-robed mage directly wrapped around left pool, and a hint of despair appeared in the eyes of those commoners. But what happened next made everyone's eyes wide open. Just as the countless strands of purple energy wrapped around Zuo Chi's body, it was as if Chushue had encountered the scorching sun and was completely roasted. And Zuo Chi has also arrived in front of these purple-robed mages. In the sharp contraction of the gaze of the purple-robed mage led by him, Zuo Chi's sandbag-sized fist rushed straight towards his face. Bang! Amidst the piercing sound of bone cracking, the purple-robed mage was hit nearly 100 meters away by Zuo Chi's punch. After sliding on the ground for a long time, I couldn't stand up anymore. Witnessing everything that happened before them, everyone present fell into a state of stagnation. What situation? However, Zuo Chi will not give these people who are infected with the void any chance to react. After his physical body was enhanced by the power of ascension, every time he swung his fist, it seemed like he had a tremendous force of 10,000 tons. And those void mages, whose physical bodies are no different from ordinary people, let alone now being approached by Zuo Chi. Under this premise, left pool is like killing a chicken, cleaning up all these void mages. When only the last mage was left, he roared madly at Zuo Chi. Come on, kill me. This way I can completely embrace the void. Lord Marzaha will also seek revenge for me. The Queen's void worm swarm will devour every one of you. Click. After this person finished his last sentence, Zuo Chi also made a 360-degree turn around his neck. From beginning to end, the battle was in a crushing posture, and Zuo Chi didn't even use the short knife at his waist. Looking at his own hands, Zuo Chi couldn't help but marvel at the power of soaring. Benefactor. Thank you very much. Several excited shouts came from behind Zuo Chi. Turning his head, he happened to see the civilians he had just saved bowing to him. Zuo Chi gently shook his head. My benefactor, I wonder why you came to Ikasia. The man in charge continued, due to the curse of the Void Cult, there are not many people in Ikasia today. I didn't expect to see anyone coming here again. When he said this, his expression could really be described as gritting his teeth. It can be imagined how hostile these people are towards the Void. After thinking for a moment, Zuo Chi said truthfully, I had nowhere to go, so I came all the way here. Where are you from? The man asked again. Zuo Chi really wants to say that he comes from Shurima. But on second thought, Zuo Chi realized that the relationship between Shurima and Ikasia was relatively light to describe as intense. After all, the main reason for both, one completely declining and the other becoming a colony of emptiness, is that they both have to occupy each other. So after thinking about it for a while, Zuo Chi said, when I woke up, I was already on the border of Ikasia, and I don't remember anything from before. Upon hearing Zuo Chi's words, everyone cast a sympathetic gaze towards him. They almost knew without even thinking, that Zuo Chi must be just like them, a pitiful person persecuted by the void. Don't worry. The leading man approached Zuo Chi respectfully and said, you are our benefactor. Since our benefactor has nowhere to go, let's go back to the village with us first. Zuo Chi nodded directly, and he was waiting for the man to say these words. Thank you very much. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Girl Returning from the Void. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Girl Returning from the Void. With the addition of Zuo Chi, these civilians have gained a lot of momentum when walking. After all, they witnessed with their own eyes the entire process of Zuo Chi just punching and killing the old wizard. Having strong companions like Zuo Chi is a great good thing for both them and the village. And Zuo Chi also enjoyed walking with these villagers. Just crossed over, Zuo Chi is still too unfamiliar with everything in this world, and he can learn some necessary information from these villagers. We don't want to leave Acacia, this place is no longer a place for ordinary people to live. But where can we go? We are destined to live on this land polluted by the void for generations to come. Upon hearing their words, Zuo Chi couldn't help but fall into silence. As he said, Acacia is located in the southeastern corner of the entire continent of Shurima and even the entire Rune land. To the south, there is an endless sea of watchers. To the north is the boundless desert of Shurima. It's really difficult for ordinary people to leave here and find a suitable place to live. With this in mind, Zuo Chi tentatively asked, have you ever thought about living in Shurima? The man led by Shurima gave a slight pause. Then he shook his head and said, Shurima has been silent for thousands of years, with sand bandits rampant, no different from Ikasia, and equally unsuitable for living. Zuo Chi tentatively said, I have heard rumors through the grapevine that the last Tsar Azza has been resurrected, and there is a possibility for Shurima to recast her former glory. Well, it's really through the grapevine. The man nodded confidently and said, it's not reliable at all. Left pool. Zuo Chi didn't bring up this topic again because he knew they wouldn't believe him. Following their guidance, the group gradually approached a village. Many places around the village are equipped with barbed fences, with checkpoints set up at regular intervals. Seeing this scene, Zuo Chi also gained a deeper understanding of the difficulties in the lives of ordinary people like Kasha. If living in a peaceful place, why would ordinary people need to arm themselves like this? At least Dalmatia and Ionia wouldn't be like this. Captain sees. At this moment, a shout from a checkpoint caught everyone's attention. The burly man next to Zuo Chi also waved his hand towards that side. It's us. After greeting his companions on the wall, the man looked at Left Pond again. My benefactor, come with us into the village. Zuo Chi nodded and said, excuse me. The fence was pushed open, and the group from Zuo Chi entered the village surrounded by the elderly and children. At this moment, an elderly man with a hunched waist came to Zuo Chi and others. Seeing the old man, Shiza stepped forward and told him about the many experiences of this trip. As he spoke, the old man's gaze also turned towards the left pool. Powerful warrior, I am the village chief. Thank you very much for saving my people. Zuo Chi shook his head and said, it's okay, I also want to thank you for taking me in. In the following time, Zuo Chi did not disturb Shiza and the village chief to report again. After a moment, the old man walked towards the left pool. Warrior, Shiza has not returned for a long time and needs to go home to visit his wife and children. Let me take you to your residence. Thank you very much, village chief. Hee. The old village chief smiled kindly and walked towards the center of the village with Zuo Chi. Soon, Zuo Chi was taken to a slightly rudimentary but cleanly cleaned room. After settling in the left pool, the old man was ready to leave. However, just before the old man left, he suddenly looked very seriously at the left pool. Warrior, if it's not necessary, please don't go to the west of the village, there may be danger there. Zuo Chi's eyes flickered slightly and he asked softly, do you need my help? With his current strength, it is not difficult to repel ordinary void creatures. If someone is willing to take him in, they naturally need to help where they can help. But the old village chief shook his head and said, no need, just stay away from that side. There's someone cursed by the void over there. What? At this moment, Zuo Chi became even more confused. A person cursed by the void. According to Zuo Chi's understanding of these villagers, they should have a deep hatred towards the void. But why are there people in the village who are cursed by the void? Sigh. The old village chief let out a sigh and explained, it's a girl. She has been cursed by the void and fused with the void monster. But unfortunately, she saved a lost child in the village not long ago and suffered severe injuries as a result. I saw how pitiful she was, so I left her in an unused miscellaneous room on the west side of the village. This time, Zuo Chi's brows suddenly raised. A girl who blends with void creatures for some reason, listening to the village chief's words, a very familiar figure suddenly appeared in Zuo Chi's mind. A girl who was destroyed by the void and returned alone from the void. However, Zuo Chi had not yet seen the girl mentioned by the village chief, so it was impossible to determine whether she was the person he had thought of. Alright, just remember not to go over there. You are the benefactor of the village, and I don't want you to be hurt by the void. Just as Zuo Chi was lost in thought, the old man turned around and walked towards the door. Before leaving, he didn't forget to say thoughtfully, I will have someone send you a set of clothes later. It wasn't until the village chief walked out of the room and closed the door that Zuo Chi regained his senses. Lying in bed, Zuo Chi stared at the ceiling and fell into contemplation. It seemed that there were too many doubts in his heart, but in the end, Zuo Chi pushed open the door of the room and walked towards the place where women and elderly people gathered ahead. According to the memory of Zuo Chi's past life, This kind of place is usually equivalent to an intelligence organization in the village. There is something happening in the village that these people know better than anyone else. Of course, most of the news may also be spread through misinformation. The elderly and children who were discussing something with each other greeted Zuo Chi kindly when they saw him. After all, Zuo Chi is a benefactor of the village, so they are still very friendly towards him. Zuo Chi approached them and asked softly, "Grandma, I would like to ask if anyone else in the village has been taken in besides me." "Shoo." Before Zuo Chi could finish speaking, the hunched white-haired old woman grabbed his arm. "Keep your voice down, don't let that monster hear you." Even a few women holding children around agreed, "That person looks like a monster in the void. I really don't know why the village chief took her in." Upon hearing their words, Zuo Chi frowned slightly. "Grandma, I heard from the village chief that she saved a child in the village and was seriously injured as a result." The old woman nodded slowly and said, "This is undeniable, but we still cannot identify with a person cursed by the void. None of us can be certain whether she will suddenly go crazy and cause damage to the village. So naturally, it's about how far away we can get." As the old woman spoke, the person arranged by the village chief to deliver clothes to Zuo Chi also came here. Zuo Chi did not continue discussing this topic with the old man. Because Zuo Chi knew that for those who had been persecuted by the void for a lifetime, their hatred towards the void could never be dispelled. At the same time, Zuo Chi can also be certain that these people are not inherently bad, otherwise they would not have been so kind to themselves. Their hatred only targets the void. After greeting everyone, Zuo Chi returned to his room. In the following time, Zuo Chi did not go out again, but stayed quietly in the room waiting for the arrival of night. Time passed by little, and soon, the bright moon rose into the sky. At a certain moment, Zuo Chi's tightly closed eyes suddenly opened, and his gaze also looked out through the window sill. Just now, Zuo Chi sensed a figure flashing past his room and heading straight towards the west of the village. This figure seems to have suffered a very serious injury and stumbled a bit while running. Slowly sitting up, Zuo Chi hesitated for a moment before jumping out of the window and chasing after him. Zuo Chi had a premonition that he was about to meet his first old friend after coming to this world. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. I come back for those who can't come back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. I come back for those who can't come back. On a windless night, Zuo Chi transformed into a black shadow, leaping rapidly between the buildings. Soon, he approached the west of the village infinitely. At this moment, Zuo Chi slowly stopped in his tracks. Not far in front of him, there is a very rundown cottage. As night fell, candles lit up in the cabin. But for some unknown reason, the candlelight was dim, as if it could be extinguished at any moment. Zuo Chi knew that it should be the miscellaneous room mentioned by the village chief for the girl cursed by the void to live in. Although this small house is located to the west of the village, it is far from the houses where the villagers live. Not only that, but even in the direction where these villagers face the cottage, they have erected a fence full of spikes. The fence that exists in the village cannot be a defense against void creatures. There is only one thing to prevent. That cabin. Seeing this, Zuo Chi's eyebrows couldn't help but furrow slightly. Crossing the fence ahead, Zuo Chi took a step towards the small house. On the other side, inside the dilapidated cabin, a figure wrapped in a dark purple shell was sitting hunched in front of the bed. Her head's carapace slowly parted towards both sides, revealing her face hidden beneath it. That is a girl with purple hair, and behind her is a pair of exoskeletons that constantly emit purple light. The girl's facial features are extremely delicate, and her figure wrapped in a shell is also tall and slender. At this moment, her forehead was covered in fine beads of sweat, and her previously firm eyes also wore a deep expression of pain. Under the reflection of the candlelight, the carapace on her waist slowly parted, and the terrifying wound slowly revealed itself. If it weren't for the protection of the shell, the wound would have almost cut her waist. Not only that, around the wound, the purple light filled with evil aura was constantly eroding her flesh and blood, making it unable to heal on its own. The girl looked at the wound on her waist, her purple eyes filled with helplessness. She didn't know what to do to repair the injury she had suffered. She didn't know who was willing to help her in this world. "Do you need help from the villagers outside?" I'm afraid she was targeted by the bows, arrows, and spears of those villagers just as she walked out of the house. But without the help of others, how could she repair this almost fatal injury? Perhaps from the moment she emerged from the void wearing this armor, she was destined for today's ending. Being alone and dying to fight against the void. I went out tonight to find a way to treat myself, but there was no gain. On the contrary, she once again encountered a massive number of void worms, which also made her already severely injured body even more inadequate. The severe pain from the waist and a feeling of weakness caused by ischemia caused the carapace on the surface of the body to gradually contract. Accompanied by this is a pain sensation on the skin that feels like needles. It also doesn't want to disappear here. In a daze, the girl's thoughts flew towards the years when she had not yet transformed into this kind of person. At that time, she was also a happy little girl from a family, like her peers. But soon after, the void prophet Marzaha summoned the void underground and completely devoured her entire village. At that time, she was only 10 years old. In the endless darkness, she could only listen in despair as the voices of the villagers around her gradually dimmed. From then on, she was alone and embarked on the path of survival in the vast darkness. She didn't know how long she struggled to walk in the darkness, and finally a bright purple light appeared in front of her. This purple glow is undoubtedly hope for a survivor who has been walking in the darkness for an unknown amount of time. She ran with all her might towards the place where the purple light was shining. But when she approached, she was horrified to find that there was no ray of hope representing it. That is clearly a void nest piled up with countless void insects. That purple light represents the annihilation of all things. Due to the arrival of the girl, countless void worms rushed towards her, trying to completely devour her. At this moment of life and death, she raised the dagger given to her by her father. After a violent tumble, she stabbed the dagger into the heart of the void worm and pulled it towards the depths of the void. Afterwards, she completely lost consciousness and had no idea what happened afterwards. When she woke up again, the eerie shell of the void worm had completely adhered to her body's surface, becoming her second layer of skin. In this void filled with crises, this eerie shell endows her with the ability to survive. Since then, she has been living every moment in battle with void creatures, while also searching for her way home. Finally, after countless years, she once again set foot on the land of Kasha, shining in the sunshine. However, although the void shell on her body gave her the ability to kill the void, it also deprived her of the right to interact with humans normally. She turned into a monster that people shouted and fought against. People even painted her portrait on the wall to remind passers-by to be wary of this monster. And when she faced everything, her gaze was always so plain. She will not give up killing void creatures due to people's hostility, let alone become enemies with them due to their rejection. Just like now. Although the people in this village treat her like monsters and be wary of her. But when the little girl in the village is about to be devoured by void creatures, she still chooses to take action to save the little girl. Although I may be pierced by the bone spurs of the top void creature Kogas as a result. She always remembers that she didn't come back for herself. She came back for those who can't come back. From beginning to end, she never abandoned this belief. But now, her confrontation with the void may come to an end. The ferocious wound on her waist couldn't be repaired on its own, and she couldn't find anyone willing to help her. She could only feel quietly, feeling the void at the wound gradually eroding her vitality. Gradually, the girl lay on her back on the not-too-big wooden bed, her purple eyes sparkling with water. Finally. Can you rest now? Dong dong dong. Suddenly, The knocking at the door made the girl sit up suddenly from the bed. She could clearly perceive that there was someone standing in front of her door at this moment. This situation was simply impossible to happen in the past. After all, who would come looking for a void monster? But now, it has happened, and it is still at this special moment. There was almost only one thought in the girl's mind about this. Do you want to take advantage of my serious injury and kill me? A mournful and bitter smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she stood up and walked towards the door. Perhaps it's time to leave this village. At least, one must also die in battle with void creatures. Squeak. The door was slowly opened, and the left pool at the entrance also met the girl's gaze. But what Zuo Chi said next stunned the girl completely. Do you need any help? Our family has a single line of traditional Chinese medicine. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Healing. Cut off rice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Healing. Cut off rice. At the entrance of the cabin, Kasha was completely stunned, and she had even forgotten the excruciating pain from the ferocious wound on her waist. She looked at Zuo Chi, wanting to confirm if she had just heard the wrong thing. And Zuo Chi couldn't help but feel a little emotional as he watched Kasha's dull appearance. Who would have thought that in a desolate land full of crises like Iwatsu, one could still encounter acquaintances? Zuo Chi originally wanted to ask Kasha what her wishes were, but when he noticed the ferocious wound on Kasha's waist, Zuo Chi didn't mention it again. Zuo Chi is very clear about Kasha's past, but it is precisely because of this that he feels sorry for Kasha's past. Zuo Chi raised his finger to the wound on Kasha's waist. If left untreated, you may be in danger of your life. Kasha took a small step back, and the light in her eyes trembled violently. She asked in an incredible voice, "Are you not afraid of me?" Zuo Chi smiled and said, "Why should I be afraid of you?" Perhaps because she hasn't had a conversation with anyone for a long time, Kasha's speech is a bit awkward. But she still asked nervously, "Are you not afraid that I will hurt you?" Zuo Chi shook his head and asked in response, "Do you seem to have no reason to hurt me? Or do you think I'm afraid of the way you look now?" As he spoke, Zuo Chi embraced his chest with both arms and scrutinized the young girl in front of him up and down. Under her long purple hair, she had a stunning appearance, and her eyes carried a resolute radiance that was unmatched by her age. Her tall and slender body was covered with a tight purple carapace, but the carapace at her waist had now parted, revealing her waist, which was clearly marked by the waistline. He came to Kasha's side and chuckled lightly, saying, "A beautiful girl with armor, super handsome. Why am I afraid of you?" At the moment when Zuo Chi's words fell, Kasha felt an unreal feeling all over her. Since she returned to the ground from the void once again, she has heard countless insults and countless cries of fear from people. However, she had never heard anyone describe her like Zuo Chi. Kasha opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but after trying for a while, she didn't know what to say. If left untreated, you probably won't be able to endure anymore. Zuo Chi repeated. And Kasha finally reacted, instinctively taking another step back and shaking her head. No need anymore, alright, let's get started. Zuo Chi ignored Kasha's words and pushed her shoulder into the cabin, then let her sit by the bed. Throughout the process, Kasha showed no resistance and just stared blankly at Zuo Chi. "Are you not afraid of me?" Kasha repeated. Zuo Chi nodded solemnly and said, "Not afraid." The tension in Kasha's heart slowly dissipated, replaced by a joyful emotion that she had not experienced for an unknown amount of time. However, after the distractions in her heart were eliminated, the sharp pain from her waist once again began to stimulate her nerves. The feeling of weakness emanating from her body made her feel the urge to fall asleep. With a slight frown, Kasha gritted her teeth and persisted. She said to Zuo Chi in front of her. "Why did you help me?" Zuo Chi scrutinized the wound on Kasha's waist, with a solemn expression in his eyes. He pointed to the small bed where Kasha was sitting and said, "Lie down, I'll help you wipe out these empty breath first." Kasha stared blankly at the left pool, then turned over and lay back on the small bed. After Kasha lay down, Zuo Chi slowly lifted his right hand. Buzz! In an instant, an incredibly dazzling golden light filled Zuo Chi's hands. At the moment when this light appeared, Kasha could clearly feel that the carapace on her body seemed to instinctively shrink a bit. Kasha is not yet 20 years old this year, and she has never seen the power of ascension, so she just stared curiously at Zuo Chi's right hand. The next second, Zuo Chi gently placed his right hand over Kasha's waist. Ziz. 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 Just like raw meat placed on a hot iron plate, a sizzling sound began to come from the wound on Kasha's waist. Zuo Chi carefully controlled the power in his hand, gradually erasing those void powers. In front of the ascending power of Gushuma, the ethereal aura on Kasha's waist wound seemed to have encountered something extremely terrifying, with almost no resistance left. When your abilities are insufficient, it's better not to provoke those overly powerful void creatures, nor to fight to save others. Your own life is the most important. While Zuo Chi was helping Kasha heal her injuries and muttering, Kasha's gaze on the small bed never left Zuo Chi. Since the village was swallowed into the void by Marzaha, she had not felt this feeling of being cared for a long time. This unfamiliar feeling makes her whole person somewhat unreal. If it weren't for the lingering pain in her waist, Kasha would even suspect that what she is currently in is not reality at all, but just a fantasy before her death. Kasha didn't understand why Zuo Chi appeared here, let alone why he would help herself. Just as Kasha was still daydreaming, Zuo Chi's right hand slowly lifted up. At this moment, the void power above the wound on Kasha's waist had been completely erased, leaving only a slightly grotesque wound. Kasha also saw this scene. Her gaze at Zuo Chi was filled with shock and confusion. After holding it for a long time, she finally spoke up and asked, "Is this a decapitation meal?" Left pool. Looking at Kasha with a helpless expression, Zuo Chi lifted his left hand and tapped her forehead. "I said, am I some heinous villain? Why do you always think I will harm you?" Kasha was taken aback by Zuo Chi's actions, but she did not dodge Zuo Chi's hand. She looked up at the roof and murmured softly, "You're not a bad person, I just haven't been treated like this before. I'm not used to it." Upon hearing Kasha's words, Zuo Chi also fell into silence. Looking at the girl in front of him, Zuo Chi felt a mix of flavors in his heart. She is a girl with an extremely bumpy background and only wants to give for others, but she has become a despised object by countless people just because of this layer of void skin. The golden energy on Zuo Chi's right hand gradually transformed, and the surface of the original golden light gradually added a touch of golden green filled with strong vitality. Zuo Chi once again covered Kasha's waist with his hand and used his soaring power to repair the wound on her waist. At this moment, Zuo Chi couldn't help but feel a little grateful that he had chosen the power of soaring. As we gradually understood, Zuo Chi also felt more and more the omnipotence of the power of ascension. Whether it's combat or assistance, the power of ascension has extremely strong effects. Under the joint gaze of Zuo Chi and Kasha, the ferocious wound on Kasha's waist was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, the wound without intervention from the void power had completely healed. After the wound healed, Kasana's slender waist with waistline also returned to a perfect state once again. At this moment, Kasha felt the warmth emanating from the large hand of Zuo Chi placed on her waist, and a very inexplicable feeling suddenly rose in her heart. However, Kasha has not been exposed to this emotion, so she does not know how to describe this feeling. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Kasha's Wish. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Kasha's Wish. In the cabin, the faint candlelight flickered on and off. Zuo Chi sat by the bed, gazing at each other with Kasha, who had sat up from the small bed. After a long silence, Kasha finally asked out the long-standing doubts in her heart. Why do you need to help me? Help a person who people call a monster. Zuo Chi spread his hand and said nonchalantly, what do people say about you? What's my business? I think you're good, that's enough. Others' ideas won't have any impact on me. Besides, I think this armor layer is very handsome. Give me a touch. Listening to Zuo Chi's words, Kasha's teeth tightly bit her lower lip, and the ripples in her eyes rippled. After a long time, Kasha hesitated and asked, am I really good? Having been isolated for a long time and excluded for a long time, although Kasha has never changed her mindset of killing void creatures and protecting humanity, she still has some lack of confidence in her heart. Ultimately, she is just a girl under 20 years old. At this age, being treated like this by others may have already collapsed or completely fallen. Kasha has a strong heart, but she also has some lack of confidence to some extent. The compliments that Zuo Chi is saying now have never really been heard by anyone. She looked at Zuo Chi with a strong anticipation in her eyes at this moment, as if she really wanted to hear Zuo Chi's approval. Under Kasha's gaze, Zuo Chi smiled and nodded. That's great. At this moment, a smile that had not appeared for an unknown amount of time appeared once again on Kasha's face. Her lips curled slightly upwards, forming a beautiful curve. Thank you. At this point, as the wound on her waist was healed by the left pool, the void armor on Kasha's body began to gradually heal and completely cover her waist. Zuo Chi was always examining all of this with a curious gaze. And Kasha looked at Zuo Chi with curiosity and amazement, but there was no trace of fear or rejection in her eyes. She also raised her hand towards Zuo Chi. Seeing Kasha reaching out to her side, Zuo Chi looked at her in confusion. Kasha pursed her lips and suddenly felt a little hesitant to look at Zuo Chi. She whispered, let me touch you. A bright smile suddenly appeared on Zuo Chi's face. He also raised his hand and poked the void armor on Kasha's arm with exploratory eyes. However, just as left Chi's finger touched the void armor, the armor on Kasha's arm quickly shrank back as if it had been startled. The spot where left Chi's finger touched also revealed Kasha's fair skin once again. It fears your power. As a healer with the power of life, your power is inherently restrained against void creatures. Seeing the confusion in Zuo Chi's eyes, Kasha couldn't help but explain, and she also misunderstood Zuo Chi as a doctor with the power of life. It coexists with me, and I can sense its fear emotions. After Kasha finished speaking, she suddenly realized that after hearing her words, Zuo Chi was not only not depressed, but also a little excited. On the left side of the pond, his fingertips lit up with a sparkling golden light, and a faint upward force converged on his fingertips. Then, his fingers began to slowly move on Kasha's arm. Wherever Zuo Chi's fingers reach, the void armor will quickly separate, and wherever his fingers pass by, the armor will quickly heal. For a moment, Zuo Chi was playing happily. Kasha couldn't help but laugh as she looked at Zuo Chi's current appearance. When others see her, it feels like they have seen a raging beast. But when he arrived at Zuo Chi, he couldn't help but not reject her, yet he still played so enthusiastically. However, Kasha never stopped left pool, let alone withdrew her arm. She looked at Zuo Chi and asked softly, where do you come from? You shouldn't be from Acacia, right? The upward force from the fingertip of the left pool dissipated, while lowering Kasha's arm. I only came to Acacia today because there is really no place to go. Come here and see if there is a way to leave the continent of Shurima. Leaving the continent of Shurima. Kasha also fell into contemplation. She wandered along the borders of Acacia and Shurima for so long, seeing countless travelers and refugees fleeing. However, few of these people are able to leave the Shurima desert or Acacia. Because they want to get out of the Shurima desert, they not only need to face the extremely harsh environment in the desert, but also need to be wary of many dangers such as void creatures, sand bandits, desert hunting dogs, and so on. It can only be said that without some extraordinary abilities, it is really difficult to step out of Shurima. This is also why the living environment in Ikatzia is so harsh, but the civilians here have never left. They dare not gamble. Once one abandons their village and decides to rush to the Shurima desert, there are only two outcomes. Find a suitable place to live, or die. Kasha looked at Zuo Chi in front of her and suddenly said seriously to him. I will take you away from Shurima. Zuo Chi raised his eyebrows, somewhat surprised. Do you know the way to get out of the Shurima desert? At first, Kasha hesitated a bit, but looking at the hopeful light in Zuo Chi's eyes, she nodded firmly. Although there may be some difficulties, I will do my best. At this moment, Zuo Chi suddenly asked Kasha, Kasha, if possible, do you want to leave Ikasia? To live in a beautiful place, such as Ionia, which has many natural spirits, or Frederick, which is always covered in snow. Kasha paused slightly, repeating Zuo Chi's words as if she was lost in some kind of memory. The spirit of nature. White snow. Kasha looked at Zuo Chi and whispered, I haven't left the continent of Shurima, nor have I seen these things. After saying these words, Kasha suddenly shook her head again. I still have a lot of things to do, I can't leave Echia. Kasha stared into Zuo Chi's eyes and said firmly, from the moment I returned from the void, I swore that I must completely uproot the void and let the humans on this land no longer be disturbed by it. After listening to Kasha's words, Zuo Chi suddenly felt his heart suddenly hit by something. A girl who has never experienced beauty, yet thinks every day about how to create beauty for others. Zuo Chi changed to a more comfortable sitting position by the bed and smiled lightly at Kasha. Kasha, if possible, what is your most anticipated thing now? What is the most expected thing? Kasha looked at Zuo Chi in confusion, not knowing why he suddenly asked. Zuo Chi added, there's no need to worry, just tell the truth. Kasha. Destruction of the void. Change. Zuo Chi made a stop gesture directly. There's no way, the desire to destroy the void is just as outrageous as Artox's claim of destroying the world. I can't do it, my concubine. Looking at Zuo Chi's helpless expression, Kasha couldn't help but smile on her face. She looked at Zuo Chi with a sparkling gaze, her pale purple eyes filled with anticipation. Can you talk to me every day before you leave Acacia? Seemingly afraid that Zuo Chi would find it troublesome, Kasha immediately added, just tonight, not all the time. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Girl Using Iwatsu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Girl Using Iwatsu. Looking at the anticipation in the eyes of the girl beside him, Zuo Chi nodded without hesitation. Of course. I also really want to hear you tell me about your observations in the void. A strong surprise flashed through Kasha's eyes. She nodded heavily and said, that's a deal. Zuo Chi raised his hand and extended his little thumb to Kasha, saying, it's a deal. Kasha looked at Zuo Chi's actions and was stunned, feeling a bit lost. Zuo Chi held Kasha's wrist with the other hand, lifted her hand, and hooked her little thumb. Pull the hook. Throughout the process, Kasha was curious as she watched every move of Zuo Chi. She looked at Zuo Chi and asked, what is this? Zuo Chi smiled and said, in my hometown, tugging at a hook means one word is certain. It cannot be reneged on. Pull the hook. Kasha looked at Zuo Chi with a curious expression and said eagerly. Can you tell me something else? Of course you can. Zuo Chi took a stool and sat by the bed, while Kasha leaned against the bed. The two of them looked at each other like this. Zuo Chi began to tell Kasha about the appearance of other continents based on his memory of the Rune land in his previous life. In the northern part of the continent of Shurima, there is a place called the continent of Valoran. Valoran is composed of Demacia, Noxus, and Frederick. To the east of the continent of Valoran is an endless sea of watchers. Further east is the newborn land of Ionia. It is said that there is abundant natural magic, so there is a lot of vegetation and the scenery is extremely beautiful. The southern part of the Ionian continent is Bilgewater, a chaotic place without any system. Further south, it is Shadow Island, which is rich in bad embryos. As Zuo Chi spoke softly, Kasha listened attentively, her purple jewel-like eyes filled with curiosity and longing. The faint candlelight flickered gently, reflecting the shadows of Zuo Chi and Kasha on the wall, pulling them for a long time. This couple, who have only met for the first time today, seemed to have completely revealed their hearts to each other. Time passed by little, and the atmosphere between Zuo Chi and Kasha became closer and closer. At first, it was always Zuo Chi speaking, and Kasha supported her chin with her hands while listening. Later on, Kasha also began to tell Zuo Chi about her experience in the void. Finally, as they looked at each other, the smile in their eyes became increasingly apparent. Unconsciously, the sky outside the cabin had gradually brightened up. Until the people in the village began their busy day and the sound of patrols reached the cabin, Zuo Chi and Kasha were still somewhat unsatisfied. "I may need to leave the village," Kasha said softly. When she said these words, her eyes were filled with reluctance and struggle. And under Kasha's gaze, Zuo Chi slowly stood up and moved around for a while, then turned his head and said to her, "Let's go, together." "Hey." Kasha stared blankly at Zuo Chi and said, "What together?" Zuo Chi pouted outside the cottage and said, "Didn't you agree to take me away from the continent of Shurima? Before that, of course, I'll go wherever you go." "No, no, no." Kasha immediately said, "You can't be with me." She wants to say that if the villagers see Zuo Chi with her, they are likely to reject him and even drive him out of the village. But before she could finish speaking, Zuo Chi grabbed her wrist and flashed towards the door of the cabin. After confirming that there were no villagers on this side, Zuo Chi pulled Kasha's foot and stomped fiercely, and the two of them jumped directly onto the roof, then quickly swept towards the outside of the village. Being pulled by Zuo Chi like this, Kasha had no chance to resist. By the time she realized it, Zuo Chi had already taken her outside the village. Zuo Chi let go of Kasha's hand and looked at her with a smile on his face. And Kasha looked at Zuo Chi, who was smiling in front of her, and ultimately said helplessly, "Don't be too far away from me. Void creatures are extremely dangerous. Only by being closer to me can I protect you. Although your strength is strong and healing, to kill void creatures, it's up to me." Although her tone was somewhat helpless, Kasha still had a deep touch in her eyes as she looked at the left pool. For the first time, someone even disagreed with the villagers in order not to dislike her. Zuo Chi nodded solemnly and said, "I understand. I'm responsible for holding your thigh." After the two reached an agreement, Kasha took left pond and swept towards the distance. Halfway through, Zuo Chi curiously asked Kasha, "Kasha, what is your usual life like?" "Usually." Kasha didn't turn back, just whispered, "Wander along the border between the land of Ikasia and Shurima, kill the void creatures, and remind those lost travelers to stay away from here." "What else?" Zuo Chi asked. "What else?" Kasha was taken aback and said, "It's gone." Zuo Chi could tell. In Kasha's life, there is no time that belongs to her. She lives almost every moment hunting and helping other humans in the void. However, according to Zuo Chi's understanding of the void, can void creatures really be killed? Not to mention relying solely on one's own efforts. The void realm will continuously produce void creatures using material resources from the material realm. As long as the material realm still exists, the void realm can create countless void creations through the material realm. But Zuo Chi also knew that killing void creatures and helping others had become Kasha's obsession. So Zuo Chi will not stop Kasha, but will plunder towards the northern border of Ikasia with her. According to Kasha, this area borders the desert of Shurima and is the most active place for void creatures, as well as a place where travelers often die. Kasha often comes here to hunt down void creatures and drive away those greedy humans. Soon, Zuo Chi and Kasha arrived at the northern border of Ikasia. Not far in front of the two, there is a sky full of yellow sand. Strolling in the yellow sand, Zuo Chi squinted his eyes slightly and scanned every corner around him. Suddenly, just as Zuo Chi and Kasha took their steps, the yellow sand in front of them was suddenly thrown into the sky by a huge impact force, and a bloody mouth rushed towards them. Looking at the sudden appearance of a whale-shaped void creature ahead and its huge teeth still hanging with bloodstains in its mouth, an incredibly strong divine power instantly emanated from Zuo Chi's right hand. However, just as Zuo Chi was preparing to tear up this void creature, a flash suddenly flashed in front of him, and a figure blocked in front of him. Immediately afterwards, Zuo Chi saw a strong purple light shining on the attached bone on Kasha's back. Ikasia Rainstorm. In Zuo Chi's surprised gaze, countless purple light bullets flew out from behind Kasha's shoulder and attacked the body of the void creature from all directions. Boom! A violent explosion sounded, causing the void creatures to stumble under Kasha's attack, forcing even the advancing body to shift a bit. After being heavily smashed into the yellow sand, the void monster was just about to dive into the sand. But at this time, a pair of purple circular weapons suddenly appeared in Kasha's hand. At the same time when the Ikasia Rainstorm poured out again, purple light bullets also flew out of Kasha's weapons. Throughout the entire process, left pool was guarded by Kasha behind. And Kasha, on the other hand, darted around and left countless wounds on the void monster. In the end, under the intensive attacks of Kasana, the void monster smashed heavily into the yellow sand, completely losing its breath. The weapon in her hand slowly disappeared, and Kasha turned to look at the left pool. There must be other void creatures in this area, stay behind me. Zuo Chi opened his mouth and wanted to say that he was not only skilled in assisting others but... Just as Zuo Chi was saying something, a mournful scream suddenly came from his and Kasha's ears. Kasha and Zuo Chi exchanged a glance and quickly swept towards the direction of the sound. As the two of them gradually approached, the screams in their ears became more and more intense. And amidst this scream, there was also a young girl's shout mixed in. Everyone hide behind me. Shushi formation. Iwatsu. End of this chapter.